Hi, welcome to After Hours. I'm Ebby Mohseni. We are here to find out more about the Vancouver Downtown East Side and how it became Vancouver Downtown East Side and some other area of that space of the city, and also to find out some solution. I would like to welcome our guest, Mr. Jim Green. Welcome to After Hours.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Mr. Green, you have a long history, and I decided not to say it myself because it's going to be so long and I have to read it from the paper. I'd rather to ask yourself. Please tell us about your background.
Okay. I came to Vancouver in 1968, and I've lived here except for a year that I lived in Paris. I went to school there for a year. I've lived my entire time in Vancouver, and since '71, I've lived and worked in the downtown east side. When I first moved there, I was in the PhD program in anthropology at the University of British Columbia, but I was also working as a longshoreman. So I would go to the longshoring hall each morning and see if I got a job, and if I didn't, I went to UBC. But I was a graduate student, so you could get away with that kind of thing. And then I went and worked in the shipyards as a marine boilermaker for about 6 years. And that shipyard was called Canron, and it's right exactly where the Athletes Village is now, the Millennium Water Project. And at that time, too, I started writing a book on the history of the merchant marine in Canada. And that took me a long time. It's the only book I've ever written because it took me so long. But I think it was very well researched and very well received. And when I finished the book, I got approached by people from the Downtown East Side Residents Association, which was an organization that I greatly admired at the time. It was run by Bruce Erickson, Libby Davies. And they had both been elected to council, Bruce to council and Libby to park board. And so there was no one to run the organization, so they hired me to do it. And that was in 1980. So I was there till 1991. So I was there about 11 years. And that's where basically most of my experience in grassroots organizing came from. Being from the trade union movement, it was a natural fit because I was an organizer there too. And we really took on a lot of big issues. The major one was probably displacement, the resupply of housing, and started building social housing. I think probably now I've been involved in maybe 250, no, probably $500 million worth of housing in that neighborhood, both as an organizer there and then later as I worked for the provincial government in housing and finance for about 10 years. And then went on to Vancouver City Hall as a counselor where I kept working on the primary project. Most of that time was Woodward's. I realized in about '83 that Woodward's was going to close, and I started working on the redevelopment of it. I was a little bit early. It didn't close till '92, but I had a lot of stuff ready to go. And so that's been a major part of my battles is getting Woodward's up and running, and it's turned out to be much better than I could have ever dreamed. So that's kind of where it is now. I work as a consultant to arts groups like the Vancouver East Cultural Center, redeveloping the York Theater, which is next to Nick's Spaghetti House. It was almost torn down, but because of the Wall Financial, they've contributed $14 million, and we're going to get a state-of-the-art theater and a great heritage building saved. It was the place where Bruno Gerussi got his start. Courtney Love used to play there, and DOA, the punk rock group. So it's got a long history, and so I'm doing that. And then I also work on redevelopment, like the Little Mountain social housing project right next to Queen Elizabeth Park. Very exciting and challenge in that one. So that's kind of where we are as of yesterday.
Are you interested to talk about the Vancouver Downtown East Side, how it became like that, the issues that we are facing right now?
Well, there was several things. First of all, a quick history. The Downtown East Side is, I think everyone knows, is filled with single-room accommodation hotels, usually historically for men. And the reason for that is that it mirrored the economy of our province at the time, right around the turn of the last century, so around 1890 in that period. So you had seamen, you had loggers, fishers, all going out for a period of time, being single and coming back and staying in the same room. So that was kind of what it was. And the name Skid Road, of course, came from the fact that they used to skid logs down on other logs. Corduroy roads are also called. So it was always kind of a poor working class neighborhood, and one that was very proud and a lot of fun. I mean, it was back when I started living there in the 70s. It was the greatest neighborhood I could imagine. You had a vibrant Chinatown, a vibrant Japantown. The food was fabulous. There was a lot of money around because of the seamen coming in to be out for 6 or 8 months to get paid at once, and we come in and spread that wealth around. There were always lots of poor people there. And then what really started to happen was the theory of concentration, where people, for instance, under Gordon Campbell, anything that was a trouble, you put it in the downtown East Side. And then the province also picked the same thing. And then they began, under the social credit government, to close down places like Riverview, which was for the mentally ill people, and just basically let them out at the corner of Main and Hastings with a couple of $100s. They had promised everyone. Carol Taylor and I sat on a committee together. We were promised there'd be housing in place before any of this ever happened. It never happened to this day, and tens of thousands of people have come from mental institutions and taken to the downtown East Side. So, and the same thing with anything around drug and alcoholism. When I started living there, 83% of the licensed seating bars was in the downtown East Side. You knew you could always get a drink. We had on the corner of Main and Hastings, a liquor store that basically sold really cheap, horrible red wine. And alcoholics knew they could go in there and get this for a song, and they get served no matter what condition they were in. So it was kind of the playground of the city, or even the province at times. The strip joints were there. All these things started adding up. And the crisis that really kicked it off was crack cocaine. When that happened to us many years after it did in the States, and it's kind of gone through the States now. But one of the reasons we've held that so long is, in my opinion, why we haven't overcome those issues is the lack of women and families. Right? There's no mothers there to protect their children. People are not born into the community. Everyone comes from somewhere else just about. So it's not transient in the sense that people just go through, but probably the average time that somebody lives there is 10 years. So it's still a stable community, but we don't have the balance we need of women and children, because women are the force that ensure that communities will be safe and healthy, because they're not going to let their children be associated with that kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons why at Woodward's, for instance, we have 75 units for families, right? You have to be a family with children to live there. Same thing with my other credit co-op that I did earlier. The Four Sisters Co-op is 50% women and children. And I think that that's a major factor in improving the beauty and the safety of the community.
Are you interested to talk about why Riverview was closed?
Why? What was closed? I'm sorry.
Riverview.
It was the theory in those days was that Riverview was isolating people from communities, and that you would get better if you were integrated into the community, which I share that position, but it means that you need to have the supports that that person needs. The Portland Hotel Society, for instance, has all the supports built in to their projects. So you have nurses and counselors and all the things that a nutritionist that people need, and that was not provided. The housing wasn't provided, but the idea of community support is great. But when one of the problems we have now is when a housing for mentally ill goes into a neighborhood, a lot of times the neighbors are up in arms because it wasn't handled properly, right? That you're told you're going to have this place next door to you. So we really need to revive the way we do it, because you're not getting better if you're going into a hostile community. Downtown East Side is very supportive of people with mental health issues, where a lot of communities are not that supportive. So we really have to work on that.
Yes. You mentioned about the Woodwards. Mm-hmm. If you would like to talk about it, I appreciate for that. And also, who is living in Woodward?
Great. Well, I never get tired of talking about Woodwards. It's a very difficult project. As I say, I worked on it since around '83, and we just finished it off a couple of years ago. It's the largest single-site development in the history of Vancouver. It's 1 million square feet, okay? So it's much larger than, say, Shangri-La, much larger than the Convention Center or anything else, and it's on one block. So it's a very, very intensely environmentally proper organization because you're not creating urban sprawl or anything. And the idea behind Woodwards is to stack as much goodness as you can into one particular project and hope that others do similar things. So in it we have, first of all, when it was being built, there were 50 Blade Runners. They're called Blade Runners, the project that I set up in 1992 with the Vancouver Canucks to train Aboriginal street kids to work in construction. You get some off welfare, 85%. We've had several thousand go through now, have never returned to government for any support. They're completely independent. They don't have to go and report to a social worker, nothing. They live on their own. They make their own money. They pay their own way. So we had 50 on Blade Runners there, and some of them are living in there now, which is utterly perfect. So we have 500 units of market housing. Most of it is purchased condos, many by people in the neighborhood. There was a deal set up that if you work for a nonprofit organization, you got support from the developer to get cheaper rates and stuff like that because he wanted local people. There's 25 units that are set up for the severely disabled in the market project. There's 75 family units, social housing units for low-income people, working poor, that type. There's 125 for people that have the difficulties that we were talking about, mental illness or addictions and those things, 125. And that sits right on top of Simon Fraser University for the contemporary arts. So it's also symbolic that the people of the community are on top, you know, rather than the way it usually is the other way around. And Simon Fraser is doing a great job of integrating people, of hiring people from the neighborhood. 50% of the people that work there are downtown East Siders. We have Nestor's Food Market that did exactly the same thing, which also hired local people. We trained them, and London Drugs, which has been great. Then there's about 20,000 square feet of space for local arts collectives, usually. Okay, that's being run by a group called W2, and they're about to move in. Next to that is 80 units of office units for City of Vancouver staff that work on things like housing and childcare, and all the kind of social people are in Woodwards. We have a childcare with, I believe, 60 units for children on the roof of that building with a big playground and all of that. The National Film Board of Canada is there. And there's a huge atrium, and we had a Thanksgiving dinner there for 500 people, sit-down dinner the other day. And we also were able to give, to proclaim that day, Vancouver Street Soccer Day, because they had just gone to Rio de Janeiro and had finished in the finals in the World Homelessness Cup. And they also got voted the best spirit, and they got a trophy, and so we had the mayor come down and declare that. And I'm currently working on a series called Introduction to Cultural Democracy.